I'm going to take a deeper dive into the housing element update process and requirements. Since adoption of the California Housing Element Law in 1969, cities and counties in California have been required to designate sufficient housing or sufficient land as sufficient densities to provide their share of projected housing needs for people of all income levels through the general plan housing element. The housing element is a blueprint for future housing development and must be updated every 8 years. It is subject to review and approval by the California Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD. Saratoga and other Bay Area jurisdictions are required to submit their next housing element update to HCD for review in late 2022, and with a deadline for adoption by January 2023. Jurisdictions that do not adopt a housing element in compliance with the housing element law are subject to severe penalties. These include reducing their say over future development, including building permits, subdivisions, and use permits. Before housing elements are adopted, the state assesses housing needs throughout California. After the state identifies each region's housing needs, the total number of housing units projected to be needed at each income level are distributed among the jurisdiction in the region by a regional planning agency. This process is called the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, also referred to as RHNA. In Santa Clara County, the methodology for distributing the projected housing needs is led by the Association of Bay Area Governments, or ABAG. In January, ABAG submitted its draft methodology to the state for consideration. On April 12th, HCD determined that the methodology complies with state law. That means that ABAG will adopt the final methodology and release the official draft allocation later this spring. Assuming ABAG's distribution is adopted, Saratoga will need to identify how it will add more than 1,712 new housing units across a wide range of affordability levels between 2023 and 2031. Over 1,700 housing units would be a significant increase in Saratoga's RHNA allocation for this next housing element update. I'll pause here for a moment so you can see the current draft RHNA for Saratoga compared to our last two RHNA cycles for 2007 to 2014 and from 2015 to 2023. Okay. Saratoga is not alone in this experience. Across the state, cities and counties are being asked to plan for a substantial increase in future housing. Saratoga's RHNA allocation using the current methodology accounts for about roughly 1% of the total units allocated to all of Santa Clara County. I'll pause here for a moment so you can see the different draft RHNA allocations for the jurisdictions in Santa Clara County. Okay, the next housing element will need to describe how more than 1,700 units will be added to Saratoga at a wide range of affordability levels. These start with housing for families earning less than $70,800 for a 4-person household using the current area median income data for Santa Clara County, and extend to market rate housing for families earning well above the median income. This means planning for over 1,700 new housing sites, and at the same time, creating policies that provide the opportunity for housing units across income levels. In the summer, Saratoga and other Bay Area cities will have an opportunity to appeal their RHNA allocations. While the city may appeal its RHNA allocation, it is very unlikely that the draft allocation will be substantially changed. Most changes are the result of minor calculation errors. The final RHNA allocations will be provided in the winter following the appeal period. Jurisdiction will then have their total RHNA allocation to prepare and submit a draft housing element to the state in 2022 for final adoption by January of 2023. The housing element itself includes 7 components. These components include the housing needs assessment that provides demographic and housing needs information for the city, the constraints analysis of existing and potential constraints on housing development and how those will be addressed, the evaluation of past performance that assess the city's progress in implementing the policies and programs in the previous housing element, the housing sites inventory and analysis that identifies specific locations available for development or redevelopment and that are appropriately zoned to support housing development. The policies and programs that are designed to address housing needs, and then last, the community outreach efforts that were conducted as part of the housing element update. A key component of the housing element is the housing sites inventory. The housing sites inventory will need to identify specific sites in Saratoga that are suitable and available to develop the more than 1,700 residential units. One of the questions we received through the city website was, can city properties like the Saratoga Prospect Center be turned into housing community recreation space? And the answer is yes. Properties like this, as well as other public agency properties, commercial properties, and vacant lots can all be considered in the housing sites inventory, together with land already designated for residential use. The next phase of our engagement process will be focused on really working with the community to identify where they would like to see new housing in Saratoga. As part of the housing sites inventory, we're required to identify sites for different types of housing to allow for development of units at a variety of income levels. Examples of different housing types include single-family homes, townhomes, apartments and condos, or accessory dwelling units, or often referred to as granny units or in-law quarters. This does not include rooms in a home that someone chooses to rent out, but it could include a small unit with a kitchen, a bathroom, and separate entrance, or something like a new housing project with independent living facilities for older adults. In addition, the sites identified are those that should have realistic potential for new residential development within the 8-year housing element timeframe. As we prepare the housing sites inventory, we will identify vacant and underutilized lots, new housing units that are currently in the pipeline and planned for development, new ADUs that are expected to be built in the next 8 years based on recent production numbers. These can all be counted towards the housing sites inventory. Following the guidance of HCD, we then can add on a buffer to units in the lower income levels to ensure that sufficient capacity exists and can be accommodated throughout the planning period. From the housing sites inventory, we determine how many units at each of the affordability levels we still need, and then we identify sites in the city to meet the RHNA through the housing element. The state assumes that increased density equals increased affordability for new housing units. So developments of 20 or more units per acre qualify as density appropriate to accommodate below market rate housing. Since the city's housing element is not due for another 2 years, some of the details about how we prepare the housing site inventory and how we calculate new potential units at different income levels are still being hammered out. Additionally, the state legislature is regularly introducing new laws to promote new housing development and adjusting how the housing element process works. So please keep in mind that some of these finer details may change as we proceed. The purple sites on the screen are locations identified as housing opportunity sites in the current housing element that covers the planning period from 2015 to 2023. None of these sites have been developed into housing, which has had consequences to the city since adoption of Senate Bill 35. We'll provide greater detail about the state law later in this presentation. But a bit of good news is that new RHNA replaces the current RHNA. So there's no requirement that we plan for or build the units remaining in our current RHNA in addition to the units required by the new RHNA. Most lots in Saratoga are single-family homes. The few large parcels we have are commercial properties like Argonaut or the Gateway. One of the difficult conversations we'll need to have with the community in the coming months is how we plan for our RHNA allocation while also preserving our grocery stores, restaurants, and other commercial businesses that are important to our day-to-day lives. If residential development is allowed on these commercial parcels, the number of allowable stories may need to be increased to meet density thresholds needed for the RHNA affordability targets. We'll have these type of hard conversations in the next phase of engagement and community meetings. Another essential piece of the housing element are the policies and programs to go along with the site inventory to help ensure that there is an opportunity for housing units across income levels. Examples of these policies could include developer requirements to provide a certain percentage of units that are affordable in each project. You might be wondering, can the city allow high density housing in one spot in Saratoga and require all those units be affordable to meet RHNA? Unfortunately, the answer is no. The state requires that the plans, including development sites, densities, and policies, be realistic. If your community does not have a history of high-rise affordable development, it's unlikely that the state will approve a housing element that relies on this approach to meet RHNA targets. As I mentioned earlier, the city does not revise and update the housing element. If the city does not revise and update the housing element before the submission deadline, the city could be left with little say over all future development, from building permits to subdivisions to use permits. We also could be subject to significant financial penalties. This means that the city can't just skip the housing element update or ignores the housing element law. Additionally, there has been a shift in the way that the state views cities' obligations related to housing elements. For many years, the primary goal of the housing element was to ensure cities and counties had zoning in place that would allow the market to build housing projected to be needed. But more recently, there has been increasing legislative pressure on cities and counties to take responsibility to ensure that the state-determined housing needs are built in addition to planning for them in the housing element. SB 35, for example, provides that cities and counties where development is not on track to meet their projected housing needs are subject to by right approvals of qualifying multifamily residential projects. This means that there's no discretionary review or public input process for these projects. And this is all required to happen also on an accelerated timeframe. Between 2015 and 2020, the city issued a total of 150 permits for new housing units. 30 of those were single-family home permits and 120 were ADU permits. By the end of the current 8-year housing element cycle, we estimate that the city will have issued permits for approximately 175 housing units. The city has not denied any applications for housing have been proposed. So as you can see, even without any denials, the real estate development market has left us far below the last housing element cycle's RHNA allocation of 439 units. As a result, Saratoga is subject to SB 35, and proposed developments with at least 10% affordable units are eligible for streamlined approval. Last year, the city received an application to build housing at the Quito Shopping Center and was required to approve the project that will result in the construction of 90 townhomes, 9 of which will be affordable. If the city were to adopt an ordinance requiring that a specific percentage of new development be affordable, that requirement, if higher than 10%, would apply to all new projects, including new SB 35 projects. And for those of you who've been tracking the Quito Village development project, construction has not been scheduled, and we do not have an estimated start or completion date. In addition to the housing element law and SB 35, there are several other state laws that have been adopted and are being proposed to promote housing development by reducing local control and creating uniform development rules across the state. These types of laws will make it harder and harder for cities like Saratoga to retain their unique character and for residents to shape their community. We clearly have a big challenge ahead of us. Planning for more than 1,700 new housing units between 2023 and 2031, along with increasing state pressure, could fundamentally change Saratoga. Given the magnitude of this challenge, we want every single resident to have a voice in the housing element update. The goal of today's meeting and others we're holding this month is to ensure that everyone is fully prepared to participate in upcoming conversations about housing in Saratoga. After we conclude the community meetings in April, we'll then take the information we gather to prepare for another round of community meetings to focus on the values and priorities of the community, as well as potential policy options. These will occur in June. We'll then move into the RHNA appeal period in the summer. Cities have the opportunity to appeal their RHNA numbers pursuant to ABAC's formal appeal process, and you will have the opportunity to share your thoughts on that subject with the City Council as they make their decisions on the RHNA appeal. Then in the fall and winter, we'll check in one more time and touch base with you, the Planning Commission and the City Council, to confirm the priorities, values, and feedback we've gathered throughout the engagement process in 2021. We'll then set out to begin working on the contents of the housing element that will have been shaped by this process. In addition to attending meetings like this, you can help us by telling your neighbors and friends in the community about the housing element update process. Make sure that they have signed up to the housing element newsletter. Tell them to watch the housing element video series. Host a small group meeting with your neighbors and friends so that we can reach more residents. And bring your neighbors and friends to meetings like this one.